Welcome back. This is part 8 of the Pāli Scriptures portion of Edward Reeb's Buddhist Books podcast. Yes, I've gone and done it. There's a new phrase you're going to start hearing, and that phrase is, for those of you watching me on YouTube. If this is the first time you're seeing me, if this is the first video you're seeing, click here instead and start with episode 1 of the Dhammapada. That's the playlist. For those of you listening on the podcast, you don't see me, so I didn't point to anything. But I do recommend starting with the first episode of the podcast. I know some people like to kind of like jump in and see what the most recent episode was, or there's like something about like, you know, hearing the most recent thing that seems more like real or more somehow like alive, or I don't know what it is. It's sort of an emotional thing, I think. But yeah, for this, you know, sure, yeah, by all means, you can sample and see what I'm about if you want to do it that way. But I do recommend starting with the beginning. And on the podcast, that'll start with an introduction to the podcast, which I just recorded yesterday, part of which I recorded more like 39 or 38 years ago. But that'll make sense if you check out the podcast. Now, for those of you who have been watching and are interested in the idea of switching over to listening to this on their morning commute rather than, you know, having to set aside time to stare at a screen or, you know, that kind of thing, I just submitted it to Apple this morning, which means they haven't had time to process it to the degree where you can just search for Edward Reeb's Buddhist books and it'll pop up. Same with Google. I updated my sitemap XML file, and I submitted my XML file RSS feed to, you know, for these technical, some of you know what I'm talking about, and some of you are like, what is he talking about right now? It's, don't worry about it, unless you want to start a podcast, in which case worry about it, and that's, you know, Google is your friend. But, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it here. For those of you watching, you know what I'm talking about. You just saw a URL appear. I'll leave it there for a little while so you can type it in. You know, there's got to be an option on your podcast app, whether it be an iPhone with the, you know, Apple Podcast, or if it's any of the other podcast apps, there's an option, add RSS feed or search for RSS feed. If you type this in exactly as it is, all lowercase, and, you know, that's https://edward-reeb.com/BB, or actually it's going this way. I'm seeing a mirror image, but you're not. BB.xml. Okay, let's move along, shall we? Let's not waste any more time on that. So yeah, that's new. I decided, what the heck, why not? And so now it's a podcast. But it did start out as a YouTube playlist. And so for those of you who were listening to the podcast and diligently listened from the first episode until now, this is the first episode in which that podcast you've been listening to exists as a podcast. And so up until now, you've heard me say, as you can see here, you know, just like assuming you can see, and I apologize. I didn't know that you were going to be hearing me without seeing me at any point, until I just spontaneously, I don't know what prompted it. I just decided, what the heck, I'll make it a podcast. So, all right. For those of you who this is the first episode you're seeing, yeah, it's all like this, pretty much. This episode is brought to you by a fading Marauders. I'm not a big Harry Potter buff. I'm a medium Harry Potter buff. I was like at a 5.5 with Harry Potter, and then after JK came out as a TERF, now I'm hovering between 2 and 3. I will see the Dumbledore movie when it comes out. I haven't completely, you know, I'm not boycotting JK, but I do stand with my trans buddies. Is that allowed? I hope so. Trying to be in two worlds at once. Harry Potter land, and I mean, I know there's a few people who are on that, you know, in that world that also can't give up Harry Potter, even though they can't stand JK's her new thing that she's into being public about. Okay, And Chappelle, right? My God. Yeah, we do get political on here, so fasten your seatbelts. Okay. So, a couple of things to clear up. Now, I do not want for my ignorance to spread like slime through the universe. That is not my goal here. So when I catch myself saying something, because I'll say things that I think I'm right about, and then I double check after I say them publicly and find out I was wrong, right? So, Mahavir, which I believe means great monastery, because in the text I was reading, it said it meant great monastery. And then I said right after that, Maha means great, but I don't know what Vir means. So yeah, I think that's what that means. So Mahavir was also the name of a man who was the spiritual successor of the 23rd, see, I've got my hidden screen here, Tirthankara Parshvanatha. What is that? Well, it's like the lineage of Jainism. So Jainism was started by Vardhamana Jnatiputra, which I am not pronouncing correctly, and I'm not pretending to pronounce correctly or to know how to pronounce correctly. So he was alive from 599 to 527 before Common Era, or before Christos, for those of you who are into that. I don't know why I'm choosing that accent. So basically, like, he and Buddha were around very close to the same time. So yeah, anyway. But his name was Vardhamana Jnatiputra. That was the founder of Jainism, the first guy. But the 24th, patriarch, the 24th spiritual successor of him was Mahavir, also known as Vardhamana. So, like I mentioned in the previous episode with Indian names, there's like 1 billion people, and there's only 10 names. So if someone says, Vardhamana from Jainism, you can say, what do you mean, the founder or the 24th successor of the founder? And they'll go, you've been listening to Edward Reeves' Buddhist Books podcast, haven't you? Okay, enough about that. There was one other small thing, which is when I said, for those of you who are watching me on YouTube, you might have noted that when I said MSS, I looked at the camera like, what the hell is MSS? It just means manuscripts. It's like, scholar speak. They abbreviate things like, the kids with their YOLOs and that's probably, nobody says that anymore. I'm way behind in my trying to sound hip. Yeah, kids used to say YOLO, right? And there's always abbreviations and new abbreviations. And even OK was once a hipster youngin thing 200 years ago. I think just before the telegraph, people started saying OK as an acronym for all clear, but all spelled with an O. So all clear. Yeah, clear spelled with a K, all spelled with an O. All clear, okay. And then when the telegraph came around, that was a really convenient way to say, yeah, I got your message. So they'd say okay. And so immediately after the telegraph, the transatlantic cable, I can't believe that our ancestors did this stuff so long ago. That and the Dutch reclaiming this claiming a vast amount of the ocean floor using those windmills to push the ocean back. Someone ought to write, has anybody written some kind of post-apocalyptic thing where those windmills all stop working, or whatever modern technology they replaced it with, or that's assisting the windmills to keep the ocean back, and the ocean comes back in, and then the Netherlands are tiny again? If that hasn't been written, yeah, write it. Get on that. Anyway, so we covered all the mistakes from previous episodes. Let's get to real quick For those of you watching on YouTube, this is a good book. For those of you listening on the podcast, it's called Making the Ordinary Extraordinary by Tamara Lucid, and it's about Manly Palmer Hall. If you know that name, I recommend this book. And for those of you watching, I recommend this interview with the author that I and a couple of my friends conducted just the day before yesterday. Okay, that's that. So let's get started, shall we? We're jumping in where we left off with Pāli literature. This is volume 7 of A History of Indian Literature. And it's like, sort of a dry textbook version of, I'm going to assume that you've been watching the previous episodes and not explain things I've already explained. Picking up right where we left off now. The schools of Banakas also had their own views about the history of early Buddhism. E.g., I assume example, have I read this already? I think I might have. Geez, I hope not. Well, anyway, I'll just keep going. Okay, so, for example, the Digha Banakas said that the Bodhisattva saw all 4 nimittas on the same day, while the other Banakas had other views. The Majjhima Banakas gave a different reason from the Digha Banakas for Ananda's late arrival. Yeah, we did read this. Why didn't I move this little thing? The Pali Vinaya goes on to relate how, following a dispute over certain points, yes, we read that already. At some time after the Second Council, the dissident monks split off from the Theravadins. Okay, this sounds like something we haven't read yet. So, yes. Okay. So after I said in the presence of 700 bhikkhus and noted that was only 200 more than the 500 bhikkhus that were at the first council 100 years earlier, approximately, Theravāda asked the Theravāda about the discipline. This council is described in the Vinaya as Vinaya Sangiti. That part we've probably already read, but this next part I don't think we have. The Dipavamsa calls it a Dhamma Sangaka and is followed in this by the Mahavamsa. The latter source adds, this is definitely new stuff here, the latter source adds, so this might not be true because it's only in one of the 2 things that are whatever I just said. I'll re-listen to it a few times and then hopefully it will sink in. The latter source adds that the 700 were Tipitakayadarins. All right. Buddhaghosa expands the story. We'll just assume that Buddhaghosa knows what he's talking about. After all, he was a 5th century Theravadan scholar monk, right? Okay. Maybe he knows what he's talking about. We'll just go with it. He expands the story and says that 700 Dipitakayadas were chosen to rehearse the Dhamma and the Vinaya, which they recited in their entireties. At some time after the Second Council, the dissident monks split off from the Theravadins and held their own great council, in quotes, called Mahasangiti. So there was another Mahasangiti. This is a different Mahasangiti. Well, dissident monks, what is this, Syria in the 600s AD? Or was that 700s? They were upset about, they were saying that, Jesus is all... Correct me if I'm wrong, do comment below, but they had some issue with some part of, in one of the ecumenical councils, they were saying, is Jesus 100% man or 100% God or 50-50 or what is it? And then someone said, it's 100% man and 100% God, which is a paradox. It's a divine paradox, and we're not meant to understand. And all the bishops were like, here, yes, that sounds right. And the Syrians were like, you guys are just making shit up now, and they were like, hey, you've marked this podcast as non-explicit, so we're going to report you. Please don't report me. That'd be annoying. I don't want to have explicit written on my... Anyway, I occasionally use the S word and sometimes the F word. So sue me. All right. That's not what they said. They said, you're just making things up. And everybody said, well, you with us or against us? And they said, we're out of here, And so then they split, and then the Syrian Orthodox were up against like the Turks on one side and the Romans on the other side. They were like, you're an anti-papist, which included the Greeks back then. The Greeks were papists. Can you imagine a world before 1000, before the Great Schism, when like Africa, Egypt, I know Egypt's in Africa. Get off my case. Russia and Asia and Rome were all on the same side, and they were all looking at Syria saying, you anti-papist, you didn't agree with the Seventh Ecumenical Council where we just determined the divinity of the manness of Jesus, we're not going to back you up against the Muslims, and we're also going to screw with you whenever we feel like it. And so they had it rough. They had it rough for a while, for like a couple hundred years at least, before the Great Schism, when Greece said, hey, Pope, the infilioque is going too far, and also we have this guy we want to make the Archbishop in Athens, and he's in tight with all the leaders and stuff. And so this kid that you picked when he was a kid because he could heal or whatever. Or no, it was like it was the other way around. The Athenians, I think, had this kid in mind that he was going to be the next archbishop, but then someone came along and was a healer, and the Pope was like, wow, you should be the next archbishop in Athens. And Athens was like, excuse me, no, like we already have a guy in mind. And then Rome was like, oh, and also the Germans screwed up the translation of the Nicene Creed, and they said that the Holy Spirit proceedeth from the Father and the Son. And I know he just proceeds from the Father, but we're going to need everybody to update their Nicene Creed to go with the German typo now. And the Greeks were like, that's it, we're out, and hence the Great Schism. So they had a Great Schism, or at least a schism. Right, let's get back to Buddhism, shall we? That's enough pre-medieval Christianity for one day, or I guess that is medieval, technically. Anyway, okay. Doop-de-doo. So they had their own great council. They consequently became known as Mahasangitikas. All right. The Mahasangitikas, or Mahasangikas. All right. During the following centuries, further splits occurred from both the Theravadans and the Mahasangikas. See, once you get that schismatic current going, then it's just you're going to schism off the schism, and the schism will schism, and then it'll break them apart, and that's why everybody has to stick together and don't break your fucking oath. I'm kidding. I mean, I'm pro-schism at times, but, it is a little like Life of Brian with the splitting and the splitting and the splitting off the splitting, that whole human element of the hierarchies and stuff. You have someone like Buddha at the top, and everybody's like, wow, he's so wise. And some of them in their hearts are like, one day I'll be sitting up on the throne and everybody will be listening to me. Oh, pretend to be wise. And then like the Buddha passes away and they're like, now's my chance. Like the Skeksis, now is my chance. I am the emperor. No, I challenge. That whole thing. The Dark Crystal, if you were wondering. It's a Muppet thing. Anyway, so yeah, that happens in Buddhism and Christianity and everywhere where you have groups that are organized in a hierarchical fashion, which is why those Nam Myoho Renge Kyo people have a point. That is the point they have. They don't have any other point other than that people should, there should be world peace. The Lotus Sutra is not as good as they say it is, but they are right about that hierarchical structure of temples and how it breeds corruption. They have a point. That is the point that they have. Okay. Blessings to you if you're watching. I had a good time the time that my coworker brought me to one of your events. Anyway, see, the map vanished because the coffee cooled off. It's magic. Go back in time 100 years and it'll be magic. Anyway, all right. Where were we? How much longer should we read this one before we move to the other one? Good question. How many paragraphs did we read? 1.5. That's the speed at which we're moving through this, which is why it will take decades for me to get through all these books. So this is going to be a long show. If you're not enjoying it, don't listen to it anymore. If you are enjoying it, well, good. That's fun. We do occasionally get back to the text. Sometimes I read more. I was looking at the old Dhammapada episodes, and I was like, oh my God, I read through like 90% of some of those episodes. But I'm lucky if I read through 10% of these recent ones. Or you're lucky, or somebody's lucky. The book is lucky. But this is a little bit more boring than Dhammapada. Dhammapada was the words of the Buddha. I felt like I'd be rude if I was interrupting, you know. But this is like, and then this schism, and then those guys, and then this happened, but I won't explain why. Let's move on to the next thing. That's what they sound like. Okay. Until by the time of the early chronicles, 18 sects were known and named. Someone should just make one big... Okay. The earliest Pāli source for the account of the Third Council, held during the reign of Ashoka, and not mentioned as such in the northern Buddhist sources, is the Dipavamsa. All right, let's look that up later. My brain is not absorbing it. There we read, and maybe we will read when the books come from the Pāli Text Society in London. Anyway, there we read that the council was held after the expulsion of certain heretics from the order. That phrase is triggering. Anyway, Moggaliputta presided over 1,000 bhikkhus. More schisms, more growth, apparently. Some things. And during the course of the I know the pieces fit because I watched them fall away, mildewed and smoldering trumpet. It's better than this. Anyway, I've done the math enough to know the dangers of our second guessing, doomed to crumble unless we grow. Strengthen our communication. It's okay. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then you're having the most fun. The people who know what I'm talking about are like, yeah, stop singing Schism by Tool and get back to the text. Okay. And now you too know what I'm doing. So where were we? 1,000 bhikkhus, and during the course of the Sangiti, was it the Mahasangiti? I don't know. I think it was. He recited the Katavatu. The Mahavamsa adds the detail that the bhikkhus were all Tipitakas. Buddhaghosa states that they recited both the Dhamma and the Vinaya. All right. Stick that there. All right. Okay, moving right along. We've got like 6 minutes left. Let's do a bit of not Sasana Vamsa. And by the way, you can pause that if you want to read it. Okay. That was for the people on YouTube, by the way, for those of you listening. It was my review. You can look up Sasana Vamsa on probably Amazon.in and find my review. I just put a screenshot of it on the screen for a few seconds. Okay, now switching gears to Sasana Vamsa, or rather Mabel Bodie, PhD's commentary on the Sasana Vamsa, which we have a photocopy of in this book. But we don't have the Sasana Vamsa in English, but we do have it in Burmese. I'm sure glad I spent those 2,000 rupees on this, or however much I spent. Anyway, Ajatagatru, the friend of the Buddha. Well, I should know his name. Ajatagatru, the friend of the Buddha. Maybe if we sing it, it'll... Anyway. Okay. Dvata Ponka. Let me get the magnifying glass because, as I mentioned, it's a photocopy of a book from the Pāli Text Society in London, who will send you the books directly if you order it from them. But I instead got this photocopy of one of their books which technically, according to the back of the book, is legal for them to publish because it's in the public domain. All right. So the Devatapanka, being king, is mentioned as the contemporary of Kalakoka, or maybe Kalasoka, considering the C has a dot under it, and they spelled Ashoka with a C with a dot under it. So let's go ahead and say Kalasoka, the former being king of Burma in the year 100 of religion, which is 700 Common Era-ish, I guess. Finally, the date of the Third Council is said to have fallen in the 12th year of the reign of Rampunka. Do you feel a little more enlightened? Yeah, me too. So enlightened. Oh my God. I'm so glad I'm reading this. Right? It really, really is enlightening. Okay. King of Sinketa, Prom, in parentheses. All right. Maybe that's the author of the book who said that Rampunka was... never mind. The section of chapter 1 that deals with the missions, which we could read if it was in English, but instead we're going to read your commentary, it may be said to strike the keynote of the Sasanavamsa. May be said. The commentary says that it may be said to strike the keynote. Well, if only we could read it, then we could, decide that for ourselves. But it's not in English. It says it's the English version of the Sasanavamsa. That's why I'm complaining. So I wrote that review. Anyway, the author gives a few explanatory notes on the 9 regions visited by the first missionaries, and of these 9, 5 are placed in Indochina. Maybe that's the keynote. Well, good. All right. The enlightenment light bulb just went off over my head. I feel like I'm in the Pure Land with... Anyway, his horizon seems to be... let's use the old... Limited. Okay. First, by an orthodox desire. The orthodox desire. Anybody looking for a new band name? To claim most of the early teachers for the countries of the South. Open parentheses, and hence to prove the purest possible sources for the Southern doctrines, close parentheses. And, secondly, by a certain feeling of national pride. Wow, they had that back then? I thought they imported that from... Okay. Right. Indochina. National pride. Are they talking about Burma? What are they talking about? Burma. National pride. I'll buy it. They had national pride back then. They have something going on now. I was like, I'm American, so we don't know anything going on outside of America unless America is directly involved. And so I was Googling traveling to Burma, and you can imagine my surprise. Unless you're American, then you have no idea what I'm talking about. Google that, and you'll find out. Unless you watch the news or whatever, then nerd. Okay, anyway. According to, where was I? And secondly, by a certain feeling of national pride. According to this account, Mahamogaputta, and that's with an H, Mahamogaputta, Tisa, open parenthesis, as if a special care for the religion's future of Marama, yes, close parenthesis, sent 2 separate missionaries to neighboring regions in the valley of the Irrawaddy, besides 3 others who visited Laos and Pegu. A few geographical notes explain the 9 regions, leaving out Sihala, as follows. Suvarnabhumi, Avatar fans, anyone, is, as in the Atakatha, that part was in parentheses, identified with SND Hamapuya Sndamapuya. Okay? That is Taton at the mouth of the Sitong River. Okay, I'll buy it. I'd buy that for $1. So yeah, the Lotus Sutra is more fun to read in a similar way that I'm trying to think of a good example. Lord of the Rings is more fun to watch than like an 18-part documentary series about the history of anything, right? Okay. I'm not saying anything, I'm just saying. All right, well, yeah, okay. Well, we said we weren't going to get anywhere, and we didn't get anywhere, so we'll pick up right where we left off next time and hopefully get nowhere. And thank you all for tuning in and joining me on the Edward Reeves Buddhist Books podcast, also known as the Buddhist Books playlist on Edward Reeves' YouTube channel. Edward Reeves' YouTube channel. I'm Edward Reeves, talking about myself in the third person like a weirdo. Not to say that people with identity displacement, what's that called? Anyway, are weird. You know, not in a bad way. Weird can be a good thing. Yeah, there's other things on that Edward Reeves YouTube page that you might enjoy. For example, my travels videos, which are fun. The first 5 include Africa, Nepal, Bhutan, and they're very like, oh, what's happening? Oh, that's interesting. What's that sound? Oh, it's a bird, you know. And then part 6 is going into India for the first time. And then that's where music kicks in. And immediately, as soon as I stepped through the door and I met Priyal. I mean, it was a week later, but in the video, you know, basically we met right as soon as I went into India, and there was music, and so, you know, kind of in my life there was music, you know, and so parts 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11 are musical. They're more like kind of music videos. They're very fun. So if you want to check that out, check out the travels videos. They're right there for those of you on YouTube. I just pointed to something to those of you listening on the podcast. All right, I'll get into the flow of that. I didn't use this today. I'll just use it once. That right there, that is green Tara. All right. That is the original painting that I used for the cover of Taco. Do I have another card? Check it out. Those are some of my poems that are published in the book called Taco. And toward the end of April, the sequel to Taco is going to come out. It's called E Burrito. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it. If you didn't, why are you here? Let's close, shall we? To the north and to the south, to the east and to the west, to the spirits of light among us and to the spirits below, we send out our reverent love and compassion. May all beings be happy. May all beings be serene. May all beings be in peace. Until next time.